Um, I'm going to show you the basic brightness and contrast, and in the handout that I've provided for you, there's some resources on talking about exactly what is contrast and what is brightness. But it's mostly about adjusting the tonal ranges to either bring out details or to subdue highlights. In this case, you'll notice that in here, the brightness is pretty good on this image, but we're going to edit it anyway. You'll notice that some detail is lost in some of our darkest darks, which is pretty common. You'll notice that the student's shirt, you really can't see his arm in there. It's there, but not really. So let's go up to brightness and contrast. So you'll notice I go up to image, I hit adjustments, and the very first selection is brightness and contrast. And it's going to bring up this great little control panel. It says brightness and contrast. It's on zeros. Leave preview. Do not worry about clicking on use legacy. And you have an accept and a cancel button. So let's just play with brightness and contrast. I'm going to click on the brightness toolbar, and you'll notice that when I move it to the left and the negative and the number up in our little readout over here goes negative, it gets darker. And then when I go the other way, it gets lighter. You'll notice that when it goes brighter, it blows out a lot of the detail in the highlights and brings out the details in the darks. If I go the opposite direction, it does the reverse. Okay? But you'll notice that if you look at the painting up there in particular, that some of the darkest darks do come out from that painting. So there's a lot of times that you do need to adjust the brightness. Usually, with the photo work that we do, it's usually we need to make it brighter. So you'll notice that if I want to go back to the original image, I just need to take the toolbar back to 0. So we're at 0. So let's just say I want to brighten it up just a little bit to bring some of the detail. I don't want to go too far out of whack because you'll notice that it's starting to already ruin the shadows. So I'm just going to bump the brightness a little bit to see if I can bring up some of these highlights here. Next, let's just play with contrast a little bit. Actually, let me take this back to 0 so that we can work with pure contrast. Oops. Okay. So when I move the contrast bar to the left and the number goes negative, you'll notice that the shadows start to come out a little bit more. And when I go the opposite direction, it actually kind of increases the what's happening in the highlights. That's the big thing with contrast. You'll notice that in the shadows, things start to come out a little bit more. So let's drop the contrast and raise the brightness just a little bit. And you'll notice that now we're starting to get some definition there. I actually kind of preferred the brightness where it was, so I'm going to take it back to 0, and I'm going to adjust the contrast a little bit down. I can contrast it up, and you'll notice that there's more of a stark difference between my highlights and my darks, but the problem isn't the highlights in this case, it's actually the darks. So by reducing the contrast, we're starting to equalize the tonal range between our highlights and our shadows. So I'm pretty happy with this, so let's just go ahead and hit OK. So we're good with adjusting brightness and contrast. The next big thing is very often our color balance is off. In this case, you'll notice that the student's face is a little bit too red. Some of our whites in the background are not pure whites. Part of that is coming from the fact that there's this big old red painting here, and when the camera picked that up, it adjusted the color balance towards a warmer range. So let's go back up to image, adjustments, come down to color balance. Now there's a whole lot of stuff that we can do with vibrance and hue and saturation. There's a lot of very particular tweaking that we can do with the image using our levels and our curves and dealing with the exposure. But I'm going to show you basic color balancing. You'll notice that you get this new sort of control panel. You can select both what range of tones or colors that you want to deal with. You've got your red, green, and blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. You've got these will correspond to the numbers as they change on the slider bar, and you'll see that in a moment. Down here, we can tone balance the highlights only, which are the bright brights, the midtones, which are sort of in between, and then we can also deal with just the shadows. So if you're finding that everything's great except for your highlights, your whitest whites aren't quite white enough for you, you can go in and adjust only those. Leave preserve luminosity clicked. Right now, because his face is just a little too pink for my liking, I'm going to work in the mid-tone range. And because it's pink, I know that I need to adjust either some of the magenta or the red out of the image a little bit. So let's just take it back. And you'll notice that immediately, just by moving this slider barely to the cyan side, we're starting to get a more human flesh-like tone. Something that's not quite so warm and pinky, like a newborn baby pig. So I'm also going to drop towards the green a little bit, and there, we're starting to get more of a human tone. It does change the redness of this image back here. One of the things I'm still not happy with are my highlights. My whitest whites are still a little too warm for my liking. You'll notice there's a lot of yellow in them back here. So I'm going to go up here, change it to highlights, and I'm going to start dropping it into the blue range a little bit. And I'll push it to the max, and you'll see it really blues out. But I don't want to do that. These are usually very small adjustments. And I'm also going to drop my sign there. And I'm kind of looking more for this. We're not going to fiddle with this too much today. I just wanted to show you how they worked. And I could do the same thing with my shadows if I wanted to. But let's just say we're really happy with this image. So we're going to hit OK. So there we go. We're in good shape. I also wanted to point out that there are some really, really, really great auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color options. That is one of the places I start first. So let's just try it. We'll hit auto color, and you'll notice it didn't really change mine too much. It did go a little deeper off to the side here. But let's say that I don't like what it has done to the image. I can always hit edit and undo. But you'll also notice that right here, there's a hotkey sort of designation, which is Command Z. I use that frequently when I'm editing. I'll just keep my fingers on Command and Z. I think on regular PCs, because this is a Mac that we're working on, it would be Control Z. There's also a step back function, which does have some slightly different relationships because it still lets that step that you've made remain there. But for our purposes, we can just undo it and fix what we've done to it. So let's come over and hit auto contrast and just see what it does. I think it went a little pink, so I don't like that. So I'm going to just keep it. I'm really happy with this image, so we'll just leave it alone.